What happened? It happened that the Western countries continued to supply more and more weapons to Ukraine. Ammunitions, missiles, anti-tank systems, howitzers. Then tanks, Leopard 2 and M1A2 Abram. The arrival of the F-16, Eurofighter Tornado, and long-range drones gave Ukraine the opportunity to strike targets on Russian soil. When an Ukrainian missile hit Moscow, causing several deaths, the Russians destroyed a convoy of weapons in Poland near the Ukrainian border, claiming it was a legitimate target as the weapons were being delivered to an enemy nation. NATO replied bombing of a concentration of Russian troops in the Lugansk area using cruise missiles. The war quickly escalates into a full-scale air war with NATO bombing of all Russian cities and Russian bombing of East Europe and Alaska, as well as launch of missiles and drones by both sides without much concern for civilian casualties. Within a week, NATO and Russia announced the general mobilization. The difference is that Russia raised 5 million men. Instead, the young Europeans showed little interest in wearing a uniform. The mobilization offices remained more or less deserted, and the American reinforcements couldn't arrive in time. So, when the expensive HIMARS and the wonderful F-35s ran out of the few ammunitions they had, most of them were used in Ukraine in the previous months, there was nothing else to stop the waves of Russian troops and their old and ugly T-62 and T-72 tanks. The European cities fell one after another: Warsaw, Praga, Berlin, Bucharest, Sofia, Athens, Budapest, Milan, Paris, Madrid, Lisboa. Only the sea stopped the advance of the Russian army. Turkey remained neutral, being NATO a defensive pact, and since NATO was the first to declare war on Russia, Ankara chose not to go to war. After the Russian invasion of Europe, the war went into a stalemate for several months. The good thing is that nobody was crazy enough to use atomic bombs. The air campaign slowed down. The stocks of bombs and missiles were over since the first month. The aircraft carriers have proved to be a too easy target for Russia's new generation of hypersonic anti-ship missiles, as the Eisenhower aircraft carrier hit by a series of Sirkin missiles while trying to approach Murmansk is well aware. China began to massively help Russia with weapons and other supplies and started a tough commercial war against the USA, effectively placing an embargo on America and their allied UK, Australia, and Canada. Many of the countries in South America and Africa began to see Russia as a probable winner and a credible force against the American hegemony. They began to openly challenge American interests in greater numbers, especially as the Russia-China bloc becomes more and more concrete. Saudi Arabia and company, fearing to remain alone against a Russian-backed Iran, pivots towards Russia and China. The petrodollar lost strength. Deprived of their European partner, under a de facto economic blockade by most of the world, crushed by the weight of military spending, the US economy collapsed. There were disorders, violences, assaults on food stores. The first state to secede was Texas, followed by California, Florida, and then all the others. This was the end of the United States of America. Canada followed the same fate. Without US strength, Britain was bombed night and day until it surrendered. Australia and New Zealand also surrendered after the threat of nuclear bombing. The last American state to sign a peace treaty with Russia was Washington, D.C. This marked the end of the Third World War. And now? Now Russia is the dominant power, Almost all European countries have governments favorable to Russia, if not directly imposed by the Kremlin. Poland is under the direct control of Moscow. The Finnish government will be replaced with a new government closer to the Russian positions. There will be land annexations: Ukraine, Moldova, Baltic states, Alaska. Europe is dissolved. Biden, von der Leyen, and 100 other European politicians are arrested. They will be tried for crimes against humanity. The Russians' allies will have advantages. China. The invasion of Taiwan is not even necessary. Without the US protection, Taiwan is almost defenseless. After a brief negotiation, Taiwan became part of China with a status similar to that of Hong Kong. However, the Chinese economy is entering a very difficult phase, having lost the European and American markets. In the long run, China will be downsized, and various tensions in Chinese society will create problems for their leaders. Iran becomes the main power of the Muslim world. They will have the atomic bomb soon, becoming the dominant regional power. Iran entered the war in the last stages of the conflict. Southern Iraq is annexed to Iran. Kuwait is in Iran's sphere of influence. The war in Yemen ends immediately. After the delivery of atomic weapons to North Korea and the withdrawal of American troops caused by the dissolution of the USA, there are clashes on the border, then the invasion of South Korea, which finds almost no opposition due to the atomic threat on Seoul. Korea is reunified. Japan must grant military bases to Russia. Lebanon become a Syrian region. There will be adjustments in the Balkans, some territories will become Serbian, and territorial changes in Georgia. Israel has prudently stayed out of this war. No consequences, but Assad will impose the creation of a Palestinian state. The scuttling of the American fleet occurred north of Hawaii, where the ocean is 6,000 meters deep. The presence of Russian troops on American soil increases after the request for help from several American states in need of quelling internal revolts and setting issues within neighbors, for example, to stop the Californian invasion of Oregon and as peacekeepers in the war between Texas and Mexico. All US states agreed to hand over all nuclear weapons in its possession to Russia. India becomes the destination for fugitives from Europe and America, people in search of better living conditions, but also for those fleeing Russian justice. India in the long run will contend the world domination to Russia and China. Globalization is dismantled. More than 3 out of 4 of the banks and almost all the great financial institutions in London, Frankfurt, and New York are closed. Putin was clear. Marriage means a union between a man and a woman, so gay pride's prohibited, no more 76 genders and similar things. Google, YouTube are replaced by RuTube and Yandex. Facebook is erased. The Russian language will gradually replace the English language as the most used language in the world.
Я так сильно тебя люблю.
The dollar no longer exists, as each new US state makes its own currency. The ruble is imposed with a forced exchange rate on all European countries and becomes the reference currency in world trade. Being the aggressors, Europe and America have to pay huge reparations to Russia. Russia will be the need to spend significant capital in reconstruction of the cities hit by NATO bombings, but Moscow will become one of the richest and most modern cities in the world. Okay, this is the new world. What do you think? Write in the comments.